sure. And then mic is on. All right. So we're recording. Hopefully this actually works. And so we're going to be talking about JavaScript today. We'll be using the editor. But I want to start out just by talking about JavaScript in general. So we're going to look at this page. And so we're just going to look at some, this is a little bit more technical than usual, but we're just going to look at some basic information here. And if you want to follow along, what you can do is open these notes and then open up the JavaScript console. And the way that you do this is on Windows, if you're in Chrome, you hit Command-Shift-J. And if you're on Mac, you hit the Mac key and Shift and J. And if you're in a different browser, there's probably something else that you have to do. You can probably right-click and go to Inspect and then go to Console. Or you can also go up here and go to Tools and go to Developer Tools and then go to Console. So some of you guys have probably seen this console before if you've taken like MMP 100 or done anything. But let's open this up so we can test some stuff having to do with JavaScript. So I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to make it bigger so you guys can see it on the projector. So this thing over here is the JavaScript console. And you can do this on any website. Like, it doesn't just have to be my website. If you go to, you know, whatever, NewYorkTimes.com, it has the exact same thing. And you've probably, if you've taken like some HTML class before, you have probably seen this, right? You've probably seen the elements section where you can see like all the different parts of the website. Again, this is something you can do on any website. It's just so you can see how the website works. So I use the console a lot when I'm developing, but it's also nice that it's there because when we're talking about JavaScript, we can actually just see how it works by typing stuff directly. So compared to other development environments, it's really, really simple. A lot of other stuff, if you're writing like Python or C++ or whatever, you probably spend an hour just getting your computer set up just to run a line of code. But if I'm working on the web, I can just open up a browser and just start writing code and it'll compile. So that's one thing that's different from JavaScript. And I won't go into too much of detail with this. It's really not that interesting or important. But the big difference between JavaScript and most classical programming languages is that JavaScript is a runtime compiled language. And what that means is that we write a bunch of code and then our browser downloads it and it actually runs it and reads through it and does whatever it tells it to do at that moment. Most languages, you have to compile them before you send them to the user. So if I'm making a piece of software like Photoshop, there's a ridiculous amount of code. So I have to compile all of that code first, and then I give it to the user, and it just starts working on their computer. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both of these styles. Again, it's kind of boring. It's not really that important. But it is the reason that JavaScript runs in the browser is because we don't have to compile it. We just write it, and then the browser does all of that stuff for us. So it's a lot easier to get started and, you know, do basic stuff. So yeah, a few things just historically about JavaScript. It was created in 1995. It's designed specifically to work on the web, which obviously at that time was a relatively new technology, especially for most people. I was 10 in 1995, and I was extremely excited about the internet and about JavaScript. I was kind of a nerd, but I was very excited about this stuff. You know, the internet really was first available to people in like the early 90s, so I don't really remember that. I was pretty young at that time, but most of my childhood I was really interested in the internet. And there wasn't really that much you could do on it at that time, and so JavaScript was really exciting. There's other stuff that was more powerful around that time, like Shockwave and stuff like that, but JavaScript has become this really dominant language where pretty much everything now runs on the web, and almost all websites used some form of JavaScript. And, you know, even just in terms of the programming industry, like knowing JavaScript is a very good thing to know as far as, you know, jobs and skills and blah, blah, blah. So it's become this like really important language. When it first came out, it was sort of laughed at for a lot of reasons. You know, the compilation thing that I was talking about before is like not very good for performance. There's like other reasons why people didn't take it seriously, but it's become a really, really important language in the last 25 years or whatever. If you're interested in this stuff, in learning more about this, there's a What is JavaScript thing that's really good. And there's also these lectures by one of the designers of JavaScript, this guy, Douglas Crockford, who's like a really great developer. He did this series of really long lectures where he talks about why JavaScript is the way it is. It's kind of funny, honestly, but if you're not a huge nerd, it's probably not that interesting. So anyway, Douglas Crockford. There's a link right here. If you take that, it'll go
Whether you're building dynamic network models or forecasting real-world behavior, Neo4j's new graph algorithm.
So yeah, it'll take you to what's actually the second video in this series, because the first video is even more sort of obscure and requires even more of an investment in this stuff to actually enjoy. But so yeah, this is like an hour-and-a-half long lecture about JavaScript. I actually really love it. It's really interesting. It's not required, but if you're interested, I would check it out. One more important thing is that JavaScript is not Java. It doesn't really matter that much, but just so you don't, if you tell somebody that you know Java, but you actually know JavaScript or whatever, you won't get stuck with that issue. It's a little bit funny. JavaScript was actually named JavaScript because people wanted people to think it was Java, because Java was a popular programming language at that time. But it has really nothing in common with Java. It's not based on the same code base. It doesn't use the same conventions. It just has the same name for basically marketing reasons. Just so you're aware of that. Okay. So for some reason this formatting, probably because I changed the browser size, whatever. When we're talking about programming, one of the things that JavaScript brought to the web is creating dynamic content. So before there was JavaScript, and many of you guys have probably never seen a website that looks like this, but at a time, when the internet was first being developed, there was no dynamic interactions. There was no animation. You didn't have little videos popping up in all the different corners. You didn't have like ads jumping out all over the place. None of that stuff was possible. The web was just some text, maybe some images, and some colors and styles. So JavaScript, along with some other innovations, added what's called dynamic programming to the web. So things could change over time. So before that, you would just look at a website and it would stay exactly the same way the whole time you looked at it. Same text, same images, same information. JavaScript makes it possible to change the information over time. So you load the website and you can do an animation, or you can add in new content if the user is typing in that content or adding their own content. So it completely changes our relationship with what we can do with the web page as a client or a viewer of the web page versus the person who created the web page. So that's why it's important. Here's the JavaScript console, which we already have open. So we can interact with our page. And oh yeah, this is actually what I just went over, but this is the controls to open the console. It's kind of hard to read here, but we have already covered this, so let's keep going. And so what we can do is just start writing some really simple code. Again, the nice thing about JavaScript is we can just do it right here. We're going to do it in the P5 editor eventually, but we can do it right inside of our notes. So if you click on the console and you just type 2 + 2 and you hit enter, it's going to tell you the answer. And you can do that with math. You can do that with other arithmetic, other operators like a multiplication or division or whatever. If I say 2 times 2, give me 4, 2 divided by 2, and 2 minus 2. So that's something simple, that we can do with our code. It's hard to explain why this is cool if you've never written like C++ or something like that. But it is kind of cool that we can just do that right in the browser. It's not very interesting, But that's one thing that we can do with JavaScript is just basic math. We're going to do a lot of basic math this semester. So the console is not how we're going to actually like write our code or write software or anything like that. It's used for debugging. We're going to go over more about debugging in a couple weeks. But it's essentially a way for a developer to see what's happening with our code if it's not running correctly or if we want to try certain things. We can use a console to like interact directly with the web page instead of having to like rewrite all our code, run it again, see what happens, keep going back and forth. So it just makes it faster. We'll look at different ways to use it, but that's basically the important way that we use it. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. I keep getting thrown off because the time on this computer is wrong. But we still have half an hour, so we should be able to get through this. Okay. So I just cleared the console by hitting this little stop sign. I don't know what you would call this sign, but that gets rid of what you see in there if you have too much stuff in there. And so we're talking about the real basics of programming right now because there's some terms that I will use throughout the semester that are not like normal, terms. They're specific to programming. And so I just want you guys to know what they are. So what we just wrote, 2 plus 2 is called an expression. An expression just means something that you're expressing with code. So you could be expressing a function, you could be expressing some math like we just did. But basically, anytime I write a line of code, it's referred to as an expression. So it's kind of like a fancy word for just saying like some code, a thing that does. So we can write a few more expressions. I also use the word statement. Sometimes you say like a statement, like 1 minus 1 is like a statement. For whatever reason, there's just like specific terminology that we use with programming. So I'll try to use those to some extent. So yeah, we can do some more statements. 1 minus 1. This isn't like real code. Like you wouldn't really do this way, but the console will let us evaluate this. So it's kind of obscuring like what's really happening on the computer. There's a lot more going on, but we'll talk about what's really happening. So yeah, we can do some math. Those are all pretty basic arithmetic expressions. So we can keep going. Another thing we can do is group things in parentheses. So parentheses are another thing we're going to see a lot of in code. And they do different things. In a statement or an expression, we can group different things together. And we'll use it to group lots of different things in other contexts. So get ready to use a lot of parentheses. So if we say 2 plus 2 times 5, we don't really need to, the math here isn't important, it's just an example. So 2 plus 2 times 5 is 12 because it's going to do this part first. The way that mathematical operations work, they're going to do multiplication and division before they do addition and subtraction, even if the plus sign comes first. So it's going to do 2 times 5, and then it's going to add the 2. If what we really meant was we wanted to add 2 to 2 and then multiply by 5, we can use parentheses to group part of our expression. So now it's saying 2 plus 2 is 4 times 5 gives us 1. So there's a lot of parentheses. If you haven't typed parentheses before, which there's not really that many other, it's funny because you really never use parentheses when you're just writing papers or whatever. You might use them a few times, but code is there's parentheses everywhere. So get used to using parentheses. Okay. So one thing that you're going to start to see, basically, as soon as you start writing code, is errors. And they're going to look like this. And the console is also nice because if you write some bad code, most of the time, it'll show you that you wrote some bad code by giving you an error. So let's say I was going to write 2 plus 2, and I forgot to add the plus. It's going to give me this error, uncaught syntax error, unexpected number. And so this is kind of weird. What does that mean? Why is it an unexpected number, right? Because we started with one number, and then we just have a space, and we have another number. And that's not allowed in JavaScript or most programming languages. The space here indicates that something else is going to happen. It's either going to be an operator or some other thing in our code. But since there's a number here, it doesn't understand what that means, what we're trying to do, because this isn't really anything as far as the programming is concerned. So it'll tell us what is wrong with our code, but sometimes it's hard to understand what it actually means. It doesn't say you're missing a plus sign, because it could be a multiplication sign, it could be a division sign. So it doesn't actually know what we meant to write, but it knows why it's not working. So sometimes it can be hard to interpret an error, but you have to think about what is it telling you, and then try to look at what it said, and then go from there. So we'll go over some more errors later in class, but just so you know, when you see something red, that's what it means. And usually it's pretty easy to fix. You're probably not going to be ready or know exactly what to do now. But if you tell me and I look at it, I'll probably be able to see in like a half second what the issue is. So you'll get used to them. All right. So in programming, something that we have is a Boolean expression. This isn't something that you probably never heard the word Boolean before, right? Maybe you have, maybe not. Boolean just means true or false, like 0 or 1. So you're familiar with this concept just from life. If somebody asks you a question, the answer is either yes or no, right? If you want to, do you want to get a hamburger, it's either yes or no. So a Boolean statement is just a value that's either true or false. It's either 0 or 1, yes or no. And they're very important for programming because at its core, all code is just zeros and ones. That's all a computer understands. But it's giving the computer different commands. And what our programming languages are basically like high-level ways of explaining those commands to the computer. So we'll see a lot of these throughout the semester. And so here's a slightly more complex statement. And so you can type this into your console and you'll see the result. When we want to know if two things are the same, we can compare them using a double equal sign. And this will either be true or false. So whether we're comparing 1 and 1 or 2 plus 2 and 4, it's going to give us 0 or 1, yes or no, true or false. So if I type in here 1 double equals 1, says that's true. 2 plus 2 double equals 4, that's true. And 2 plus 2 double equals 5, and that's false. So that's a good question because we haven't gotten there yet, but you'll see very soon that the single equal sign means something else in programming. And we're probably not going to use it. I might have a slide on this, but we may not get there tonight because we probably won't actually get there until next week. But that single equal sign does something else in programming. So for comparison, like this probably looks like a math thing that you've done in algebra before. So for comparison, we use 2 equal signs. So that's a good question. There's other versions of this that we'll get into. Like I can actually use 3 equal signs if I want. I don't think I can use 4 equal signs. And they mean slightly different things. We don't really need to know right now, but we'll go into it a little bit more. So yeah, double equal sign is for comparison if we want to know if 2 things are the same value. Okay. So we can also compare relative values. So you've probably seen greater than and less than in math. So we can ask, is something less than or greater than? So that's another thing. We will probably not actually do a lot of that until week 4. But just another thing that we can do with our JavaScript. So 3 is less than 4 is true. 99 is greater than 100 is false. So in programming, we'll see probably in week 3, we'll start to do this a lot. There's a lot of cases where we need to know if something is true or not, and then we make decisions based on that. So you can imagine it for any type of interaction. If I click a button, like if I'm playing a video game, let's say I'm playing like tennis, and I click my tennis racket, it's going to say, is the tennis racket and the ball in the same place? And if it is, it's going to hit the ball back. It might calculate some other stuff too, But that's the first thing it's going to ask is, are they in the same place? If they're not in the same place, then I miss the ball and I lose the point. So we're going to be doing this a lot in our code. So another operator we can use is less than, equal to, greater than, equal to. Basically what it sounds like, it's similar to less than or greater than, except it includes the value. So 0 less than or equal to 1 is true. 1 less than or equal to 1, whoops. Also true. 0 greater or equal to 1 is false. 1 greater or equal to 0 is true. So just another operator that we will be using at various times throughout the semester. Okay, so now we can talk about some different types of data. And to be honest, it's hard to know why this is important until we actually get into it, but we have to know everything that we're going to see in the code when we start writing the code. So in JavaScript, we have two types of numbers. We have integers, that's a whole number, so there's no period at the end. And then floats is a float number, so there is a period, it has some fraction on it. Okay, so if we say 3 divided by 4, it gives us a float. And if you've never written code before, this won't mean anything to you. But if you have, in most languages, you have to specify whether a number is an integer or a float. And in JavaScript, you don't have to. And it has to do with the way that computer memory works. If it's something you guys want to learn more about, we could go into more depth at some point. But all we really need to know is that we have two types of numbers, but we can add them together. We can do whatever we want. So if I say 1 plus 1.5, JavaScript's not going to say, you can't do this. It's just going to add it together. So another quick thing, if we want to see what something is, we can use type of. And so if I say type of 1, it'll tell me that's a number. If I say type of true, it'll tell me that's a Boolean. We probably don't really need to use this a lot, but just something to be aware of. If you're working with some data and you don't know what it is, you can use type of to check. Okay, so we've seen two data types. We have numbers. Numbers are really straightforward. They're just numbers. You guys most likely all understand what a number is. 0, 1. You can add, subtract. You can describe things. So when we start to actually do design, we're going to be using numbers to describe things, like how big something is, how far to the right or left it is on the canvas, how far up or down it is, what color it is. We'll use numbers to describe different colors, like how much red, how much green, how much blue. There's we'll use numbers a ton to tell the computer where we want to draw different stuff. We'll use Booleans to make decisions, as I mentioned with the tennis video game. Another data type that we'll start using most likely when we start working with text is string. And string is probably the hardest one for people to really figure out and understand. But a string is basically just any sequence of letters or characters that we want the computer to remember. So if I type in string like this, it says, well, actually a string is already a function, but let's say I type in the word hello. I get an error there, and it tells me hello is not defined, because I can't just type random stuff in code. It doesn't know what I'm doing. I have to actually tell it what I want it to do. If I want to just use the text hello, like if I was going to text somebody hello and I needed to save that data, I have to put quotation marks around it. So JavaScript can understand this. Or I can use double quotation marks. Either one is fine. And basically what this is saying is keep this data together. To us, we know what hello means. It looks like a word. But to the computer, it doesn't care. It sees this as H-E-L-L-O. That's all it sees. Okay, so it doesn't know that we're saying hello. It doesn't know that we're trying to say something. It wouldn't know if we spelled it wrong. It wouldn't care. It's just a series of letters. And so you can think about that, if you're writing a message to somebody. you are going to type in like, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. The computer is not like, going to call your friend's phone and type it out for them or whatever. It just records what you wrote as a bunch of data, and it sends it to the person, and they read it and they understand what it means. So we'll use strings a bit when we start adding text in a few weeks, but we'll also use them later to keep track of data in our program, because obviously with numbers we can keep track of numbers like 1 or 2, whatever. But if we want to keep track of other types of data like a username or a password or something like that, we need to use strings to do that. Okay. Here's some strings. So we can also use spaces. Hi, I'm a string. Okay, so we can use a space inside of a string. We can't usually use one outside of a string, but we can use one there. We can check to see if something's a string. And if we want to use a quotation mark in a string, there's a few different ways to do it, but one easy way, if I say I'm a string, this gets confused because I'm using the same type of quotation mark. But if I say double quotation mark, I'm a string, it'll actually let me do that. There's other ways to do this, but that's a simple way to do it. Okay, so those are our 3 basic data types. JavaScript is pretty simple. There's a couple more data types that we'll talk about later, but we only really have those 3 basic ones that we have to worry about for now. Okay, so we're just going to look at a couple more things just to see more of what we can do with JavaScript, and then we're almost done. So a lot of how JavaScript works is by collecting information into what's called objects. This is another data type, and there's a bunch of objects that are built right into our browser that we can use to do different things. So let's check out a couple of those things, and then we'll be done. So if I type in document and hit enter, it's going to print out the document for me. So go ahead and type in document and open it up. And what you'll see is the HTML content and everything that's in it. So you can see all the various information, all the links to different scripts. You can see all the slides in the presentation. So here's the content, and here's the different slides. And if I go all the way down to the bottom, you can see that slide. You can see some slides that I took out of the presentation. There's kind of a lot of them, actually. This is like old stuff. I don't know why I took it out, but it's probably just like it's already long and too technical, so I probably was just getting rid of some stuff. But you can see all of this content, and we can actually do stuff with this content. So that's what JavaScript lets us do. It lets us take the document that exists and make changes to it. There's a couple other things that we can look at, like the Navigator. This is kind of useful. It tells us stuff about the device that the user is using. So, if we know that a user is using a phone, we might change our website to look different than if they're using a laptop. And this tells us a bunch of stuff, like if I say Navigator, .user agent. So it tells me, it's a Windows, it's Windows 10. It tells me I'm on Chrome. So it gives me a lot of information that I can use to change my website if I want to. Then there's the window. The window is the browser itself, and it contains like everything I can do with the browser. There's a ton of stuff in here. So for example, if I want to make my project be the width of the window, I could say what's the window.inner width, and it's going to tell me it's 922 pixels. So I can fit my art or my game or my project to match the width of the window. I can say window.inner height. That tells me the height of the window. And so if I go over to elements and I click on stuff, for some reason it's not showing me. Oh, because I'm in the slides mode. Never mind. Anyway, we can also look at parts of our document. So there's our document. I can say something like document.get elements by class name. Oops. And we're not going to use this kind of stuff a lot because we're going to be mostly working with P5. But just for example, if I say get elements by class name and I get all the paragraphs I guess I didn't use a lot of paragraphs. Let's get all of the, oh, actually, I think I need to say, no, that should get me, let's try, no, okay. I guess I didn't use a lot of paragraphs. It's kind of weird. Let's say if I say divs. No, something weird. Let's make sure I'm on the right. Huh. Document dot. Let's see. Okay, I have a container. I have some content. Definitely have some paragraphs. Let's try reloading this. And let's see. Document dot get elements by class name. Oh, I'm an idiot. I'm using class name, but what I mean is tag name. Okay, so there's all the paragraphs in our document, and we could do something like change them. So we could say for, this isn't going to make sense, but eventually you'll learn it. For let elem in document dot get elements by tag name p. Oops. Forgot my parentheses. Let's say elem.style.color equals green. Oops. Can I set properties? Doesn't want me to do that. Let's see what the element is. Oh, it's just giving me this. Oh, that's annoying. Okay. Sometimes I forget how this actually works. Okay. Let's just do something simpler. So I'm just going to delete the whole page. I'm going to say document.write hello. So I can actually just like edit my content. I can interact with the content. I can say document.body.background color equals green. Let's try that. Oops. Oh, I got rid of I deleted the body. Oh, whoops, sorry. No, I forgot style. There we go. Okay. So I can use JavaScript to make changes to the website after it's already loaded, after the content is already there. And that's pretty cool. There's a lot of different things that we can do that. We're not really gonna do a lot of direct interactions with like our HTML and CSS though. We're gonna do more stuff with rendering graphics, which is something we'll start talking about on Wednesday. But this is just basically going over what JavaScript looks like and how it works. Yeah, I think that's everything for here. So I'm going to stop recording, but then if you guys have any questions, we can go over questions. And we have like 10 more minutes, so that's good. So I'm going to stop this recording. Oops.